Hello, and welcome to episode 4 of That 60s Recording Podcast. I am your host, Joe Montague. Today we are talking to a producer from Sheffield, UK, called Colin Elliot. He's also a bass player and many other things, as you'll hear. I worked with Colin about 4 years ago in a band that I used to be in called Dancing Years. We enjoyed Colin's production on some Richard Hawley tracks or albums, and we contacted him about working with us, and we made an EP with him. And I loved Colin's studio, Yellow Arch. I love the way he works. I love his attitude towards recording. And for me, it was an absolute no-brainer to get him on to speak to me so that you can hear about it. I think you'll really, really enjoy this conversation. As you'll hear me say, I think he's got a very similar outlook on recording music that Ken Scott does. And they do, in fact, say some very, very, very similar things, which I find really interesting. And Colin's recording now, you know, bands in the current era, but with the same mentality as somebody like Ken Scott, which I think is a bit of a rarity at the moment. Anyway, we'll get straight to it. I'm not going to do much more of an introduction because I talk through it quite a lot with Colin at the beginning of this. Before we start, again, I just want to say thank you to everybody that's getting in touch with positive comments about the podcast. As I keep saying, I'm just very grateful that you're all listening, and I would feel remiss not saying it at the beginning of each podcast when there are people who are taking the time to get in touch with me and say lovely things. I just want to say thank you to you all. So anyway, I hope you enjoy this conversation with Colin Elliot. So today we're honoured to be joined by Colin Elliot, who is a producer, a bass player, and an arranger. I'm a bit conscious of the order that I'm saying them in. Is that which order would you put those in?
Well, I'd probably say a musician first, actually.
Oh, there you go.
A musician who produces and engineers and plays and arranges. But yeah, I don't really know. Never really had to answer that one before.
So I'm going to list some of the artists you've worked with because it's a pretty ridiculous list. So obviously Richard Hawley you've played with since the beginning, and then the rest of this list you've either worked with as a producer, musician, or an arranger, or as in a lot of cases, all three of them. So Slow Club, Tom Hickox, Dwayne Eddy, Jarvis Cocker, The Wedding Present, Kylie Minogue, Paul Weller, Tony Christie. My band Dancing Years you worked with, although I don't know if we deserve to be on a list of all of that lot. But that's quite the list. So you also now run a studio called Yellow Arch. I'm sort of conscious that I've said you now run it, although some of those artists presumably you worked with at Yellow Arch. But I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your music history leading up to Yellow Arch, and that's been going for 25 years now. Is that right?
23 years now since we opened in 97.
And it was an old nuts and bolts factory, I read.
Yeah, it was. Although when we that's what it was originally. They used to make the huge nuts and bolts that hold ships together and bridges and things. So we've got a doorstop in the reception, which is this, I don't know, I suppose it's about 10 inches wide, great big bolt. Or is it a nut? I don't know which they are, actually. Anyway, the thing that goes round the other one, yeah, that's a huge thing that you can use for weightlifting. But when we took it over, it was derelict and empty, although it had loads of old scrap metal and got a lot of kind of old photocopiers, and people had just dumped a load of stuff there. Asbestos, lathes, no roof, loads of pigeons. And I took it on with Andy Cook, who's been my business partner for years. He's a drummer.
Yes.
He had a rehearsal room in town. I had a studio about 2 miles away from him, and we were working together a lot in different bands and just running from one room to the other all the time. And we just thought, this is crazy. Why are we going from your place to mine and mine to yours? Let's put them together and have a rehearsal room and a studio together. And we just went driving around Sheffield looking for suitable places to put it, really. And after about 2 months or so of looking, we came across this place in Neep's End or Kelham in Sheffield. It was all industrial then. There was nothing else around us at all. There was a sandwich shop and a chip shop and an old tyre place opposite. And we went in and looked, and there was room there to put 3 rehearsal rooms and a studio. So we took it on, thinking that we'd have a nice place for us to work and everything would be paid for by other people. There was never really a great intention to be a commercial venture or a community hub or anything like that. And it just grew out of that as more and more people came to use it, and we took on more rooms. And after 20 years, or well, how long ago? Another 5 years ago. So kind of 17 years in, we built a venue as well and started putting on gigs and more community event and teaching people and that kind of thing.
I think that's the way to survive in the industry at the moment. I would say is being a pillar of the community as opposed to just offering one service. You need to be everything to lots of people, and I know that takes lots of time, and you seem to have done that.
Yeah, I think that's the way everyone's multitasking now, aren't they? And I think you have to these days because of the way the music industry's gone recently, and there's the big budgets aren't there anymore. So to regard yourself as exclusively as a record producer, I think there are very few people who are going to hit those dizzy heights these days. You have to be a record producer, and you have to probably be the songwriter, and you might have to be the arranger and the engineer, and there's going to be a lot more in-house stuff and a lot fewer budgets. People 5-10 years ago, an album that would have sold 100,000 physical copies now sells 10 or 15,000, and if you're lucky, and gets a few streams, but the revenue just isn't generated now to justify the big industry that was around with all the big studios and all the extra sound engineers and associated stuff that goes along with it. I mean, I'm amazed that so many studios are hanging on in there, really. Some of the big ones have gone by the wayside, haven't they?
This is it. More seem to disappear. In every year, you see another one going. I don't know who will be affected by sort of COVID and what's happening right now.
No, it's really hard to say. It's the whole coronavirus thing has messed everything up, including our future. I don't know what's going to happen to Yellow Arch yet until we come out the other side of it. But up until this happened, I mean, the one thing that was encouraging in the world of music, I think, even though the money being generated is less, I think there's been a general feeling in not just in music but in culture in general to go back to what should we call it, the artisan, I suppose. People are buying craft beer instead of Foster's Lager. People are going to their local bakery to get bread rather than Mother's Pride. And I think people are still looking for unique experiences in music and something a bit different. So I think that tradition was set to continue. I hope it still will after the virus and everything.
I think I've seen the same, and that's why I was keen to have you come on the podcast and talk about this. Was from having worked with you with the band I was in, Dancing Years, it seemed to me that your approach, this is I've called this the 60s Recording Podcast, and your approach to production and all-round involvement in the making of a record smacked of 60s mentality, which is why I thought speaking to you would be relevant. I wonder if, before we delve into that kind of thing, if you could just tell us a bit about what you were doing before you came to open Yellow Arch, and start. Were you producing records before you had Yellow Arch?
Not really, no. I mean, I wouldn't say I was producing. It's always a hard step to say when you've suddenly become a producer, isn't it? But I was always in bands. I was playing either percussion or bass from the time I went to university. I started off as a classical player. I played cello in my youth and in orchestras. I went to university and I didn't really like the classical scene. I didn't study music. And I joined a band and I played bass in that band. And those were in the days, this was 1982, 83. Those were the days where you could get hold of a Tascam 424 cassette 4-track. And that was how we recorded stuff there on the cheap. So you'd have a cassette, you could only record 4 tracks at once. So you'd record 3 things and then you'd bounce them down onto the 4th track, and then you'd overdub some more stuff, and then you'd bounce them down onto one of the other tracks, and you'd build up your song that way. And I was always the one, even though it wasn't my gear, someone else had bought it, I'd always shove people aside and take over. I just liked the technical side of it, although I'm not a technical person, and I've never really studied the real technical side of it. But I just like operating gear. And I guess I've always been a bit of a control freak in the sense that I like to be in charge, and I always think, probably arrogance or something, I always think I can do it better than anyone else. So I'll hear in my head that it should go that way, and I'll just barge someone off the machine and start recording, and then tell people what to sing and what to play, and it didn't always go down well with other people, I suppose, and some people, who had probably had better ideas than me were shoved out the way, but that's how I learned, just through doing it and wanting to do it. And I suppose that went through. Then I was in other bands, and the 4-track went, and I can't even remember. I think I probably bought the 8-track. So we had a Fostex or a Tascam 8-track recorder. And then I had a job for just under a year when I was about 22. I thought I'd see what it was like to have money. And so I got a job selling photocopiers of all things. I made loads of money and I hated it. And I used the money to buy some more gear. And then I set up another small studio, and I got a mixing desk and a microphone, and then a reverb unit, and then a noise gate, and then a compressor, and just gradually built from there. And then when the opportunity to get more gear came along, I'd always buy it myself or go in with other people. Sometimes a band would club together and buy some stuff. It was always me at the controls. I think from that moment on, I was always the one who said, "That's all right, I'll sort that out. I know how to record this." So I think as you're engineering stuff, and as you're playing in the band, obviously you end up, it's inevitable that you have an influence on how the thing sounds, and also on what performances are chosen. So you can be engineering and someone can be playing a drum part, and you can say, that was pretty good, but why don't you try it with an extra kick before the snare or something like that? And they go, okay. And suddenly you're influencing, and suddenly you're a producer. And I suppose that the first time you're officially a producer is when someone says, "Will you produce my record?" and you get paid for it. But that was years away from that point, really. Yeah.
So was all this happening? You were renting a place at that point?
Yeah. So it was. It started off in bedrooms, just doing it in people's bedrooms and attics, and then we had a rehearsal room in the old YMCA in Sheffield, which they purpose-built a studio in the basement. No one was using it, so it had a kind of control room, very small control room, but it had sound isolation from the live room. Unfortunately, the live room didn't have sound isolation from the weights room, which was next door. So we used to have power lifters dropping huge weights and grunting
Amazing.
On most of our recordings. We were there for a couple of years, then we moved to another place. Just an old empty industrial building. We were on the 7th floor of this empty industrial building.
Wow, not the best for lugging gear about.
It had a lift, actually. It was all right. But it was just massively echoey, and even though you thought you were in a small room, actually the walls were so thin and you were effectively in a warehouse. It was horrific for sound. Then we went from there and we rented another room and we built a dividing wall in there. That was great. We called that the boardroom. That was the room where they first. It was the company that discovered the process of making stainless steel.
Oh, wow.
In Sheffield. So we were in the boardroom. We called it the boardroom. It had all oak panelled walls and everything, but it was old, disused place. And we just, built a dividing room in there and put a few tie lines in. And then it was from there that I went into partnership with Andy Cook and found Yellow Arch and built. I mean, it depends what you call a proper studio. Yellow Arch isn't really a proper studio in terms of floating floors, and we did it all on the cheap. We did the whole thing for about 20 grand initially.
Wow.
And that was three rehearsal rooms and the studio.
So that's just the upstairs section, if I remember.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but again, we built a dividing wall and we put some tie lines in and we soundproofed it as best we could. It wasn't good enough, and then over the years we've added a bit more and a bit more and a bit more, and every year we try to improve it and make it better. It's still not a proper recording studio in the sense that somewhere like your Abbey Roads and Ayr and all those places are. And even around us, people spend a lot more money. Chairworks in Castleford, great studio, they've probably spent, I don't know, 100, 200 grand on the building to isolate things and float floors and put tie lines in and do it all really properly. We're still suffering if a police helicopter flies overhead. It spills onto the mics, it's that's just the way it is.
There's something really lovely about the building that it's in and the area that it's in. I'm always a big fan of studios being a little bit isolated from what's going on, and I'm not too familiar with Sheffield, but Yellow Arch is kind of on an industrial is it? Would you call it an estate? It's a really old industrial estate, isn't it? With big warehouses
there's a lot of tooling, I think they call it, and industrial steel, not the really heavy industry. A cutlery. There's a place down the road that's been transformed into an eating establishment now called the Cutlery Works. So there's lots of little mesters and lots of engineering that was around us, but it's all gradually changed over the years. And now we're in, although we officially it's Neep's End, but now everyone knows it as Kelham, and it's become a really popular kind of drinking tourist, not tourist, but a drinking and eating area with antiques places and things like that. Which means we're kind of being priced out of the area at the same time. It's just a bit of a shame, but we were just an island in the island of culture in the middle of a load of steelworks, basically, when we moved in, and gradually other rehearsal rooms have moved in around us. There's another set of rehearsal rooms, like probably 3 or 4 studios and rehearsal rooms down the road. There's another studio directly downstairs from us. People just went, oh, that's a good place for music, and have come in all around us. And, gradually I think through us being there, we've transformed the area into a kind of cultural centre now.
You get that feel at the studio when you go in, you get a sort of innate sense that it feels like Sheffield, and that you get the feel in the building as well. When you're in the building, it's quite grand. There's really high ceilings, and I'd much rather be in an environment like that than something that's been treated to death and doesn't have the same sort of, I don't know what like a historical, or there's just something about it, and maybe it's not soundproof properly, but that doesn't matter because you feel good when you're there.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely. I'm biased, but it's my favourite place to work because it just doesn't feel like a place. I mean, no disrespect to all the great studios around, but because they have to be sealed from noise, they're generally sealed from the outside world, and you go in there and you have to have air-conditioned air, and you have to have no daylight, or if the daylight is seen, it's through 3-4 windows, and it's quite distant, and you do feel detached, whereas in Yellow Arch you feel like you just happen to have wandered into somebody's kind of industrial attic and you start making music, it's got a kind of openness and spontaneity to it, I think, that a standard studio hasn't. So it swings and roundabouts. You don't get tired in there as well. I mean, people can work happily for 12 hours in there without feeling like their head's going to explode, because it's almost like, well, especially with the windows we've got, it's almost like being outside sometimes.
I was going to say it's spacious and light. And
yeah, lots of space, lots of fresh air, lots of daylight. Yeah, it's a good place to work, definitely. And we do suffer from the slight restrictions of noise coming in, but that's never really seemed to stop us making good music.
You've got quite a good collection of sort of older gear there. There's a couple of Fender Rhodes, if I remember right, and that kind of stuff. And I remember you played bass on the record that we made there, and I remember was it a I can't remember what it was now, but was it a violin bass you were using for that, or?
Yeah, I probably used my violin bass on. I can't remember actually what I used. I can't claim that to be particularly old. It's not a really classic antique one, but.
I was going to ask who your influences were, bass-wise and sort of musically, because it feels quite vintage influence. The way that the decor of the studio and the gear that you've got in there.
Yeah, that's a difficult one, isn't it? Because I guess I don't really like many modern records, I have to say. And the modern records that I do like probably sound quite old. I just like music when you can hear the musicians. I think my whole ethos of recording and producing is that I want to hear people create and play. So the minute you start over-tuning and over-quantizing and timing and altering things with the computer, you start to lose people's character. And anyone can take something and put it in tune and put it in time, but it's the character of the voice, and it's the character of a certain guitar sound and the way that people interact as well. And if you start messing with that too much and computerizing it and controlling it too much, then you lose the uniqueness that comes from the individuals.
I was going to say, with that in mind, what are some of your favourite records? Can be just purely based on music, or sound, or songs that you. What would you say are your most influential records that you've listened to?
Oh God, that's I knew it. I should have expected you to ask me that. I mean, I love things like. I love a lot of old Frank Sinatra and Matt Monro, and I love a lot of classical music, and I love the Beatles and the Stones, but I like a lot of country music. I like Lucinda Williams a lot, and I love early Joni Mitchell, and Ricky Lee Jones, and
fantastic.
But then I absolutely adore some ABBA and some disco and Zeppelin and AC/DC. So it's really hard to say what. I just like different things from different eras and different styles, and it's really hard to say what makes you like something, isn't it? But I certainly don't stay within a genre, and when I'm at home and I'm about to do some cooking or something like that, I'll just suddenly get an urge to listen to the Doobie Brothers or Steely Dan suddenly, or the Eagles, and I haven't got any in my record collection, but I'll suddenly go, well, they're good, let me just listen to that for a bit. I love harmonies, I love Mamas and Papas, and it's so hard, Joe, to say what makes you like something.
It is.
But I like things that are good.
I think looking at the list, I've been scribbling a few down as you've been saying them, and it's there's something, I would say the word that ties all of those together is they're all quite authentic artists. They're all, even though ABBA are a poppy band, they're an authentic. They're authentic in what they do, and everybody's got whether it's Joni Mitchell just sat with a guitar, or like a big Beatles arrangement or something. They're all quite honest artists.
Yeah, I know what you mean. But then if I was talking to some of my friends who are really into some classic blues or something like that, they would hate half the stuff I've just mentioned, and then they'd roll out their Little Walter records and John D. Hooker or whatever. It's not blues isn't a genre I've particularly gone into, but I can sit with Richard Hawley and he'll play records for 5 hours, and I'll go, well, they're all brilliant. I've never heard them before, and they're all utterly as rootsy and earthy and honest as you can get. and then you go back and you say, well, let's put a Doobie Brothers record on with Michael McDonald singing, and you go, well, this is crap. Because it just suddenly seems like it's very lightweight and got no guts and no sincerity, and it's very contrived, and thought out. But I don't know, you forget about the Little Walter stuff and you reset your parameters and you go, actually, no, I do like it. And I do like Steely Dan, and why shouldn't I? It's a very strange process, isn't it? But the thing about music is that it's there for anyone of any mentality to find what they like within it. I just have a certain way of working when I make music. I almost can't force myself to. I couldn't do a pop record. I can't make things sound glossy and glitzy and perfect. It's just not in my nature to do it. But I can do a country record, and I can do a blues record, and actually I can do a metal record if I like the people and what they're trying to say. I think it's quite possible to switch genres, but the same kind of characteristics will always come through in the end. I don't know if that makes sense, but
it does make sense. So let's talk a little bit about that, and I'll talk about how your approach working with bands. I mean, I know a little bit about the way that you work from recording with you with Dancing Years. And it was I really enjoyed how much how I'm careful to say this, but how much influence you had on the process without it feeling like you just managed to, well, everything like you've said before, you managed to pull the best out of us in doing it. We all felt very well looked after musically with you there. It was like having a big comfort blanket, which was really nice. So so when a band gets in contact and says they want to work with you, what's your where do you go from there?
I'd always ask why they want to work with me first, what it is they've heard that I've done that they like, and what they expect from me. Because that's a big one, and sometimes you can tell straight away that people are expecting something that you just can't provide. Especially if someone says, well, I want to make a smash hit single for Radio 1, and that's I'm not the right person for that then. And then I just have a quick listen to something. I had a guy contact me recently. He's a singer-songwriter up in Scotland, and he sent me 5 or 6 songs down, and I didn't have time. I was really busy, and I literally only had time to listen to, I'd say, 3 seconds of the start of a song, 3 seconds of the middle, and I did that for 3 or 4 tunes, and I knew straight away that I liked it, because I could tell from the quality of his voice, from a couple of the lyrics, and just the way he'd approached making the demos, that it was interesting. So I'd always look to see if there's something. If I've got to like it, I've got to think that by the end of it, I'm going to have something I've enjoyed working on, and something that I'm happy to put on my CV. And if I think I'm going to get to the end of it and not want to tell anyone I've done it, and I've only done it for the money, I wouldn't do it. I want something where I can I don't do Instagram and things like that, but if I did, and I've got a website which isn't up to date, but if it was up to date, I'd like to think every time I finish a project, I'd be going, check this out, everyone. Here's another thing I've done because I'm really proud of it. Once you know that you're going to like it, you then have a duty to make it as good as you can for yourself. At the same time, you have to make sure that you're getting what your client, and I say your client, to me the client, whether they're signed or not, is always the artist. You've got to make sure that the artist has what they want at the end of it. Because there's nothing worse than getting 2 weeks into a recording and then have the artist turn around and say, yeah, it's all right, but I don't really like it. I mean, can we change the drums now? You go, oh God, no. So it's important that the artist owns the piece of music, really. So I think I always look on my role. Sometimes you don't need to do anything. Sometimes the work comes fully formed. You've got a band, they're brilliant. All you need to do is record it as best you can and as true as you can, knowing how they want it to sound. And hopefully they've come to you or they've come to me because they know it's going to sound a certain way, and I realise that for them, and they're happy. With someone like your band, Dancing Years, which was a great project, and I still love listening to it, I knew that there were great songs in there. I thought, I can't remember exactly, but I think the potential for the way the songs were arranged wasn't really fully formed, and it was all a bit of a mess, and some of it was a bit rambling, and you had a chorus where you didn't realise you had a chorus. So my process there is to suggest and to make you question yourselves and to suggest changes and see if you like them. Because if you don't like them as a band, then you can feel the reluctance coming through in the performance. And everybody's got to be so on board that by the time we come to record it, the recording process is a pleasure, because you're just recording the thing that you've all agreed is brilliant by this point. You're not questioning and trying to change things in the recording process.
It's coming flooding back now. I can remember being in the rehearsal room at Yellow Arch, so not in the studio yet, in the room at the other end of the top floor. And I can't remember whether we said that we knew the songs needed work from you, or whether I have a feeling that you suggested that we might get together in the rehearsal room first. So presumably you'd already thought that they might need, from their demos, that they might need some work. And I remember coming away from that first rehearsal, or production rehearsal, if you like, feeling the mood in the band was a bit confused. And now in hindsight, that makes sense from what you've just said. It meant that we went away and thought about what needed to happen. And often, as is in the case in bands, there was a principal songwriter in our band, and they needed to sit and think quite hard about what their vision for their song was. And that makes sense in terms of you making suggestions rather than telling, because we had to go away and work it out for ourselves, and then come back. And then once we got to that point where we were really happy with what was happening, that's when we went and recorded it. And I can remember that really vividly now. Now you're saying all that.
Yeah, and also you're working with different egos is the wrong word, because ego sounds like a bad thing, but ego isn't necessarily bad. It's just what drives people, what motivates people. So you're working with different egos. Sometimes people think they've really, really written a great song, and who am I to change it? And that's also the problem sometimes with bands. It may be that the singer of a band really wants to work with you, but actually the drummer doesn't. I mean, the drummer, I don't know why I picked on drummers, Joe, particularly. The drummer might, and bass player or guitarist, they might be sitting there going, who is this guy? What's he telling us what to play for? Because in the singer-songwriter's head, he's made a contract with the producer because he likes the way things sound. The rest of the band thought they were great and didn't need any help. So sometimes you have to be careful. You have to work with the personalities you've got to make sure that everyone gets on board and is happy. There's another band I work with in Scotland again, and from the start they've always trusted me completely. And we get in a rehearsal room and they say, right, here's what we've got. And I say, right, I think you should change that. They go, all right. Tell us what to play again. What was that? Well, play that. Okay. And 90% of the time I change what they've done without them questioning it. And then they might just say, actually, do you know what? We quite liked it this way before. I go, okay, fine. But so some bands, they're quite happy to be put entirely in my hands. Other times bands come or artists come with almost a fully formed thing and they just want me to help them finish it off. It's very variable from artist to artist and from song to song, really. But from my own personal point of view, it goes back to this, I guess it's my ego, really, that says if I think something's not good, I won't let it through. I really will fight if I think something's not good enough. If I think a performance isn't good enough, if I think a song's too weak, if I think there's the instrumental's 32 bars long and it should only have been 8, I'll say, I'll question someone and say, well, why is that? Why do you want all that instrumental there? Why are you picking this song when you've got another better one? And I'll very reluctantly put my name to something that I think isn't strong.
I was going to say it's an admirable quality in this, in the modern era where a lot of service people in, I'm trying to think of the right sort of umbrella term to call it. As a producer, you're serving an artist. The artist booked you, and I think there's a lot of people who would just be yes men to get the paycheck, and I think that it's becoming a rarer commodity that you're willing to, you find people like you who are willing to say, no, it needs to be this way. And I fervently believe it needs to be this way. And I think a lot of artists probably at the end of the process feel like they trust you more because you were willing to talk to them in that manner.
It's just a question of being honest with people. And I if somebody really, really wants the snare drowned in reverb and I really want the snare up front, in the end, it's their record. It depends how far into the recording process we are. If we're at the there was one band I worked with who came to me and they said funnily enough, they said they wanted a 60s sound. And I said, well, do you think that's what I do then? They said, yeah, we love the sound you get. So I recorded with them for 2 days. And right from the start, I got the kind of drum sound I'd normally get. And they said, no, we don't want that drum sound. Oh, right, well, that's what I normally do. They said, no, we want a more 60s sound. So I was forced in the end to do some weird, really dry kind of mono thing because that's what their idea of a 60s sound was. I'd never done it before. And in the end, I think we got through 2 days and I finished the project off because they'd come to me from a town some way off. I can't remember where they were from. They travelled over and I thought, well, I'll finish it off. But at the end of it, I gave them a mix of the song and said, there you go, put my name on it and see you around sometime because we were obviously never going to work together again.
Yeah.
It was really strange that they said they wanted to work with me and then completely wanted me to change everything I did.
Well, 60s is a wide-ranging, there's a huge amount of different sounds coming out of that era.
Yeah.
From year to year, it changed massively.
Yeah, there's a huge spectrum of sound, isn't there? I mean, I know we're talking about a 60s podcast for you, but I really love, I love everything from the 30s, from the old Django Reinhardt recordings and things like that they have a certain quality or lack of quality that gives them it's a comforting sound, that really small. It's so easy to listen to because it can just be in the background and it's not in your face at all. And then you go through to the 50s and you listen to some of the Capitol recordings and the Ella Fitzgerald and Frank Sinatra American Songbook stuff, which is just astonishing in its sound quality, and you think, well, how can anyone ever get better than that? And then you get into the 60s where experimentation started happening, and that's fantastic. And then the 70s all had this kind of gluey warmth to it. And then the 80s, suddenly you start getting this harsh digital computerized thing. And from then on, I'm not saying no good records get made after that, but I've kind of lost interest after that. and I find albums made in the 90s and onwards just generally quite tiring to listen to. And I don't want to go through a whole album because they get louder and louder and more in your face and don't have any space. And I think one thing about what I do is that I generally try and make music that has space, that you feel you can walk into. As a listener, you can walk into the room and you can envisage everybody playing. That's the kind of thing I like to do. I like to keep space, and I don't want things to be shoved in your face, and I don't want people to be shouted at by the music. I want them to be drawn into it.
I did a bit of research listening back to things that you'd produced and been involved with, and I have a sentence down here in my notebook I've written down. I've put that I would describe your production as roomy, but has an epic sound quality to it. I'm referring to the strings there. And then I put there's a lot of space. And that is something that does seem to stand out in all of the different records that you've worked on, that there's somehow there is just a lot of space there. And I can't put my finger on how it happens, but it sounds so natural and small, but epic and spacious all at the same time.
Right. That's good. Well, I like that. That's kind of yeah. I don't know why either, but even when I try and do something different, it usually ends up the same. So maybe I have certain patterns that I repeat, and maybe it's my limitations as a sound engineer. You know, I mean, as I'm sure you're aware, and this probably won't come as any kind of insult to you, but sometimes the most able drummers, the ones who've studied everything and can play any style, are not the best session drummers. They might be for some people, but they're not for me. And the people who make the best session drummers are the ones who can only play in one or two styles. And you say, well, actually, I want someone who I want a country drummer who plays with a lot of feel. I'll get someone who can only play country or a bit of rock and roll or something. But he's never going to make the session he's never going to be standing in for Jeff Porcaro on a Toto record. You know what I mean? Yeah. Because people who can do that suddenly can't play a simple backbeat. They have to play it with a certain attitude. And that's the same. Then the same's true. I've known of some great singers, and you see them go on The Voice where they say, I'm a backing singer and I've been singing for 20 years and I've backed all these people. And then they say, well, go on then, play. Not play, sing something for us. And they almost don't know who they are in terms of the way they sing, because they've got too many choices. And they could sing like Marvin Gaye, but they could sing like Paul McCartney, or they could sing like John Lee Hooker, and they have too much choice and they're not sure who they are. And I think that's probably true of the way I work. If you say to me, make me a 60s sounding record that sounds very much like Small Faces or something like that, I don't really know how to do that. And if you say, make me a modern pop record in the style of Take That, I haven't got a clue how to do that either. So when an 80s influenced band comes to me and wants to make an 80s record, I might say, yeah, I do remember the 80s and I do like some of that sound, but it's still within the parameters of what I know and what my taste is. And you're always going to end up with something that sounds like me. Like when you try and do handwriting, you try and disguise your handwriting, you always end up with something that's characteristically yours. I think that's probably true of most producers who have a sound of their own, is they can't really switch to do something else. That's their sound. And they'll sound very different if they're doing a country record or a jazz record, but they'll still be, like you've picked out, there'll still be qualities that are common to both.
I think it's That's a really interesting point, and I can feel that from my own music journey. That I went to music college sort of a decade ago, and you get told that you need to be really good at everything and all of this, and then slowly but surely I've begun to realise that that focusing in on one specific area, which for me was Beatles sounding drumming. I'm a huge Ringo fan. I've always loved his playing, and that suited my philosophy on drumming. And the more I focused on that, the busier I got. And I think, but at the same time, it's a really scary thing to do. I've had to unlearn a lot of things, or things have fallen away from my skill set because I haven't nurtured them, because I didn't need them. And it's quite a scary thing to do, to embrace to embrace who you are. We're sounding really deep here, but it seems to me that from what you were saying about your journey, sort of in the early 90s, perhaps around about when Yellow Arch was becoming a thing, you were quite confident with who you are from the start, and that's perhaps why you've got a sound like you do.
Yeah, I don't know if that's... I'm a bit lost on that one. I don't really know if that's true.
Well, I think all I'm saying is that when you're faced with a career in music, you can try and be, when you're trying to please lots of people, you end up doing a little bit here and a little bit there and a little bit here, and something that's stuck out from lots of the things that you've said is you're very, you've made a commitment to one thing in your mind and stuck to it. And that seems to be standing you in good stead in terms of getting you getting a great sound and a sound that's uniquely yours. Whether you're maybe aware of it or chosen to do it or not, I'm maybe suggesting that's because you're so. Because you, I'm trying to think of a good way to phrase it, but because of the way that you're so focused on where your parameters are in terms of what you're willing to work on or what you like and don't like, that you do end up with a sound that feels like it just comes out every time by accident. But it might be because you're aware of, because you're so comfortable with who you are and what you know and what you want. Musically, I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Gone down a bit of a deep rabbit hole.
Yeah, I mean, there's also, as I've got older, which I have, there's a slight, it's not laziness, but there's a feeling that music should be, the whole process should be enjoyable. And I'm almost going into life philosophy now, but I don't want to spend 2 weeks in a studio with someone I don't have fun with. And I want the whole process to be enjoyable. I kind of think that if you're enjoying yourself as you go along, then you're going to be making better music. And that whenever I see someone in the studio really, really struggling to come up with an idea or to achieve a performance, I usually tell them to stop, and go take an easier route. If someone's trying to play a solo that's beyond them, then simplify the solo. Let's not keep going and going because that's not you anyway. Let's make it easier. And if a song's not working and we're struggling to come up with the right harmonies or the right sound for it or something, well, let's leave it, put it aside. Let's not worry about it. Let's not stress. So the whole process becomes a bit more relaxed and a bit more fun and generally moves along a lot quicker that way. So I like to think that everything we record generally is enjoyable and good fun. And then at the end of it, you end up with something that everybody's proud of and that you've enjoyed making at the same time. And that's probably why, I don't know, 80% of the people I work with do come back to me and do some more, because I've helped them get what they want and we've had a good time at the same time. and I'm cheap as well.
All right, so I'll move away from sort of philosophy for a second. Do you have a favourite project you've worked on?
Oh, no, I mean, obviously some of Richard's stuff is great. I'm in danger of missing out people that, not that anyone's going to listen to this, of the people I know. I'm really proud of an album I did, A Girl Called Eddie. So that's the actual Richard Hawley and I produced this artist, and the artist's name is A Girl Called Eddie. That's a great album. We did that in about 2003, I think. And I'm still astonished at how good it sounds when I think how much I must have learned in the subsequent 15 years. And then I listen back to that and go, oh, actually, that's that was pretty good anyway, even with the restricted equipment, you know, ADATs and no computers and really limited reverbs and a cheap desk. But it was still sounds great. So that reminds me that the ideas overrule the gear by a mile. So yeah, Tom Hickok's was a great album, A Girl Called Eddie. I work with a band in Scotland called A New International. They do more theatre-based music. I really like that. I really like your project. A couple of tracks off that. Yeah, but mostly I've liked everything I've done.
I'm going to put some links to some of the albums that you've just mentioned in the notes for this show. So if anybody is listening and wants to talk to check them out, I'll put them in the comments bit. And I know you've just said that gear isn't the be all and end all, but I was one of the questions I'd like to ask. I spoke to a chap last week who he asked me this question, and I thought this was quite a nice question to ask people. Do you have a desert island piece of gear? So that could be a microphone or a piece of recording gear or whatever you want it to be.
I've probably got a couple of bits, and they would both be compressors, which is the Universal Audio 1176 for drums.
Yeah.
I haven't tried enough plugins to see if anything else will do it, but nothing else seems to crunch the way they do. And I've got an AMEC 1998 compressor, which I didn't realise how much I valued until it broke. And I do nearly all my vocals through that. And it's just got a quality somewhere between transparency and obliterating compression, which just... I couldn't find anything else that sounded like that when it broke. So fortunately it's fixed again. So I suppose those two, but to be honest, I mean, I think the skill of any great producer and engineer is that they will, the trick is to always know in your head what sound you want to hear, and then to manipulate the gear you've got to get that sound. So, oh, hello. What was that? Was that you or me?
That was me getting an email.
Yeah, the trick is to always know what sound you want to achieve, and then whatever gear is at your fingertips, you use that to get the sound. And I've just been forced, because of coronavirus, that somebody asked me to do a mix, and I wasn't prepared to go in the studio. So for the first time, I've just done a mix entirely on my laptop without any outboard gear. And it's only a MacBook Air. It's not even got decent plugins or anything. But I still just worked and worked and worked until I got what was in my head, and it wasn't far off what I would have done in the studio with great speakers and outboard gear. So yeah, Desert Island gear. No, I wouldn't be too worried if I lost all my gear. I think if someone comes with a guitar and a microphone, we can always make something good.
I love that. There's a quote from, pretty sure it's Jeff Emmerich, where people were asking him why why I think they were talking about the AKG mics, the D19s that they were using for Beatles, and they were saying, why did you use those specific mics? I'm pretty sure it's Jeff Emmerich, and he said something like, because they were there. That's just what we grabbed and put on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, I've got people ask me sometimes, because if anyone's not heard Richard Hawley's stuff, he's got a beautiful voice, and I get asked occasionally, how do you get Richard's vocal sound? And somewhat facetiously, I just say I put a microphone in front of him while he's singing.
And then you put him through the Amet compressor.
Well, because I do have a chain, but the chain's changed over the years. But his voice has changed over the years as well. But to be quite frank, the stuff that I make when I use the Telefunken, whatever it is that he owns now, he's got the U48, U47 Telefunken style thing, and that goes through a thermionic culture early bird, which is $3,000, and then that goes through a Calrec compressor, and then it goes out through my desk and back through the AIM. It's all this chain, and you could add it up, and it's probably £15,000 worth of gear. And then you hear him recorded on the BBC or at a live show, and he's got an SM58 in front of him, and a bog standard compressor or nothing, and he still sounds pretty much the same, really. So all these thousands of pounds worth of gear and these obsessions over gear, they make fractional differences compared to the thing you're recording. So, it's always the little bit of teaching I've done, I've always said, look, it's all about the source. It's so much about the idea and then the source, and then the very, very final thing is this tiny little percentage of difference you make with the gear. It's not about the gear. Gear can make things sound nicer, but give any of the good engineers you've been talking to, give Ken Scott an SM58 and a tape machine, he'll make something better than someone fresh out of college thrown into Abbey Road, because he knows what he's looking for.
I'd suggest that you two have very similar philosophies on the way that you do things. He said a lot of the same things you've said, which is really, I find it really inspiring. It's a nice, it's for a lot of young people especially. I mean, I was definitely guilty of this when I first was getting into all of this. You think that gear is the answer, and and you don't trust it when you hear what you've just said, that it's what goes in that counts. You think, well, it can't be that. It must be the gear. And then you slowly learn that it is what goes in.
Yeah.
And it's inspiring to know that, although it's harder to acquire the skill to do, to play the instrument well enough to put it in. It's easy, it's easy to buy a piece of expensive gear.
Yeah.
But it is quite inspiring to know that the gear doesn't matter.
I suppose the problem for some people, if you want to become a producer and you're not necessarily a musician, then what I've just said diminishes the role of a producer so much. Because actually all I'm saying is that the best thing I'm going to produce is the best songwriter and the best singer with the best song. It's not my decision to put an RE20 inside the kick drum and a U47 on the outside. It's that I'm going to have somewhere along the line, I'm going to have someone who's written a great song with great lyrics and who delivers it brilliantly. And then it's my job to enhance it as a producer. But those things are almost outside your sphere of influence as a producer. So it might be hard for someone who's setting out, who thinks, well, I've got to learn everything about compression and everything about EQ, and they watch all the tutorials about how to mix things. And in the end, if you're mixing shit, you're going to get shit. There's no way around it. And if you've got something great to record, the only thing you can do is either capture it right or screw it up for them. So yeah, it's kind of taking away the mystique, and you almost have to choose to stop trying too hard, I think, and just make sure that everything you record is as good as it can be and fits with the thing that went before, and then you've done your job, I think.
I absolutely love it. I could listen to you talk about this genuinely all day. I could just pick your brains and talk to you forever.
Well, if you did, I'd probably contradict myself 50 times as well.
Thank you so much for coming on and talking to me. It has been a real privilege.
Well, thank you. No problem.
So there we are, Colin Elliott. I hope you enjoyed listening to that conversation as much as I enjoyed having it. It seems to be becoming a little bit of a catchphrase for me. I enjoy all these conversations. I considered whether or not to put a bit of a disclaimer in at the beginning about the heaviness of the conversation around 45 minutes in, but then I decided not to. I just thought I'd bring it up. I hope you enjoy the candor of these conversations, and I'm deliberately trying to keep in parts of it that, as me speaking, maybe make me feel uncomfortable, but I think as a listener, I hope you enjoy them. Anyway, you can find more information about Colin and Yellow Arch at yellowarch.com. I will also put links to all this stuff in the show notes, and I'm going to put some Spotify links to some of the albums that Colin mentioned that he was quite proud of working on. Next week, we're going to be speaking to Clay Blair, who is from Hollywood, and that sounds very glam, doesn't it? It's from Hollywood. He runs the old Producers Workshop studio, and I think it's called Boulevard Recordings now. If you don't know, Producers Workshop is where Pink Floyd have recorded and many other amazing bands back in the day. And Clay is an absolute Beatles nut. So I have a pretty amazing conversation with him. It's so nice to just get nerdy about the Beatles. So I'm 100% sure if you listen to this podcast, you will absolutely love that conversation. He's a really, really great guy. So tune into that. As usual, you can contact me or get in touch with me. My website's allyouneedisdrums.com. Email address joe@allyouneedisdrums.com. I'm on Facebook, search for that, or Instagram @allyouneedisdrums. As usual, please do get in touch. I'm a real person in a real room. just say hey. I'd like to say a big thank you to my good friend Joe Kane for the intro and outro music that you listen to. He's an amazing musician, and another amazing friend of mine, David Henshaw, for providing the beautiful artwork that he did for this podcast and continues to do for each episode. I hope you all have an amazing couple of weeks doing whatever you're doing, and I will speak to you soon. Goodbye.